Hello, folks. How you doing? Glad to be with you today. Uh, I'm gonna talk about something that everybody has probably heard of, and these are words of power. Words of power, and how words of power are used today, and we'll talk about their origin, where they came from in the first place. Well, we know that the earliest humans, okay, were after the main thing. They were after was food and drink. Gathering the food involved hunting, you see. And when it comes to language, the first humans, well, they copied animal sounds. They didn't have a language, they didn't have an ABC, and they didn't have a teacher to teach them. They communicated basically by sign language, animal sounds, basically, from the beginning. This is what they heard, this is what they were surrounded with, that is, sounds of the animals. So because these people were basically hunters and gatherers, when they went hunting, they communicated in the sounds of animals, you see. And using the sounds of animals, it turns out, attracts the animal. Yeah. I mean, we are all familiar with, let's say, the duck hunter. He goes out on the lake somewhere and there's a little dugout, and he has a little instrument that he uses to attract the ducks. Well, it's the duck sound. Quack, quack, quack. That's the sound made by this little instrument that he uses to attract the ducks. Okay? These things are very simple. Now, we're talking about words of power. People say, what is a word of power? Well, that's what it is. Words of power originated with and in the purpose of communicating by the ancient folks, communicating with each other, and to attract the animals, the prey. The animals became their totem. For example, the baboon, called the Cynocephalus. That is a dog-headed ape. We have some people in the world today, hunters and gatherers, who use animal sounds, but not all the time. When they're at home with their families and so forth and so on, and having social discussions or whatever, they have a language they use for that. But when they go hunting, they have a different language. They use the words of power, the language of animals. Even to this day, I'm not talking about a million years ago. I'm talking about what some people do today. They have the double language. So when they go hunting, they use animal sounds to attract the animals. This is what our ancestors did. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years ago. So the hunters and gatherers today, they do the same thing. You see, they use words of power. That's what these sounds are. They have the power to attract in some ancient scriptures it would say the power to call into existence. You know, well, of course, when people say, well, to call into existence, that sounds like, well, we can make the animal just appear out of thin air. He's here, just by using certain sounds. You know, well, that don't happen. We got to remain, let's say, within the bounds of the laws of nature. The laws. We know that we can't make a sound and have something just pop up, come into existence. But when let's say the duck hunter out there on the pond in his lake, and he uses his little instrument, quack quack, to call the ducks, and the ducks appear, then he has called them into existence. As simple as that. He didn't create the ducks out there on the pond. The ducks heard the sound and they responded to it. The sound then becomes a word of power because it called the ducks into existence, or into the presence of the duck hunter. You see? So the early folks, our ancestors, who used words of power, okay, of course, handed these words down from generation to generation. And we have hunters and gatherers in the world today who use words of power. It's like, you might call it the first language, because, as mentioned, the earliest humans used animal sounds to communicate with each other. But now the folks have a language they use it when they're back at camp talking to the family members and whatnot, and they have the language, the animal language they use when they go hunting. And these animal languages are words of power that existed for a long time. Now, we know that in some religions today, maybe all of them, that words of power are used, okay? It's a separate language, okay? So we take the Catholic Church, okay? When the priest is giving the service, you know, they have a thing where they speak in language. Speak the language Latin. Okay, well, let's go back 500 or 600 years ago. When the priest spoke in Latin, only a few people understood. Because the folks back there wasn't educated, they didn't understand Latin. You had to go to school to learn Latin, etc. It wasn't like just listen to your mom talk and pick up on the language as children do. No, you had to go to school to learn Latin. It was like the divine language. And then, of course, the priest had the regular language. Regular language. Well, if it was in France and they had a French service, well, he spoke French when he's talking to the everyday people. But when he gives the service, he talks Latin. You see the relationship between, you see that the same principle is existing when the hunters and gatherers were home talking to the family members. They used one language. When they went hunting, they used another language. So the priest will use two languages. When he's talking to the regular folks, he uses a language. When he's giving the service, he speaks in Latin. So Latin was in effect the words of power. They only used, under those circumstances when he's delivering the service. It's the same principle. Sounds have the power to attract. Sounds have the power to move the life force within an individual. We all know this. We know that we can be moved by music without even with any words involved. Just the music can move a person because sound travels throughout the body. And so does words of power. You see. And the music isn't coming to us in terms of verbal language. The sounds of power wasn't in terms of verbal language. They were animal sounds. The Pokes didn't have a verbal language, like the ABC, like the alphabet gives us. No, they just copied sounds. And these sounds turned out to be words of power. And these are the sounds that are words of power are used to attract, okay, let's say, for example, within the person, to bring out, a person can do this himself, to bring out the so-called God within or the netter within. Okay, folks, that's your words of power. And I'll be talking about how a person, a human, can become the chief god or the chief netter. It's interesting. Okay, folks, have a good one, and I'll be talking to you soon. Subscribe. Okay, bye-bye.